I'm Carlton, former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe for free.
His name is Carlton King. Welcome to the Black Spy podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security and geopolitics. For over a quarter of a century, Carlton served in Scotland Yard's Special Branch, Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service, the National Public Order Intelligence Unit and SO1. My name is Firgas Esack. I work in the media. Sometimes I'm Carlton's partner in crime, talking about the relationship between the press, the police, the armed forces, politicians, and just freestyling. I ask the questions you all want to know, and mostly Carlton's right. But every week we learn something new. Every day's a school day, right?
Absolutely. And I learn from you every second of every day.
I'm grateful to the ends of the earth that we get to have this banter, but as it's a new start for 2023... I wonder how many times I'll actually be right.
I think you're nigh on often right, to be fair. I think it's just different sides of that prism. Because I think that...
Of that prism, yeah, I know. It's funny, isn't it? It's funny. I was telling somebody about this podcast and they said... And I was talking about the dichotomy and they said, you know, that adage about, like, the pen is mightier than the sword?
Very powerful. Very true.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because, yeah.
Very true. Actually, that is fantastic. That's very true. Because what you, in fact, let me give you a good example on it. Because you're going to ask me a question on I don't know what today. But let me give you a very good example on it. I was talking to a guy just the other day. And he said to me, he says, you know, the country's in a state, strikes here, this, that, the other, blah, blah, blah. And he says, and the police are all corrupt. I said, where'd you get that from? He says, oh, I've been watching that Line of Duty. I said, right. He said, yeah, everybody's corrupt in that. I said, you do know that's not true. Right? Now, the reason why I'm telling you that is because somebody's written that. What's he called? Is it the Mercurio? Frank Mercurio? Is that what he's called? He's written that.
Mercurio, yeah, Jed Mercurio.
And what that's it, Jed Mercurio. What he's written, people are believing as gospel. So the power of that pen, and then put into cinematography, is absolutely powerful. Because I'll tell you, in my 30 years of working within the police and the services, I'm trying to think of an openly, in the United Kingdom this is, of an openly corrupt individual, right? I can think of one guy who basically was a guy who tried to find people guilty for offences, not because he got anything out of it, but because he felt they'd committed the crime, right? And he got done for it and thrown out of the job. So that's that. But I can't think, and this is what my own eyes would have seen. I'm not saying there aren't any corrupt officers, but what I'm saying is it's not the means that the officers are corrupt that's fallen over themselves, like in Line of Duty, or in fact anything like that at all. Now, when I talk with old timers now, who talked about the 1950s and 60s, they then said there was far, far more corruption because, of course, they were paid a pittance. That's how they explained it. They were paid a pittance and basically they augmented their salaries. But by the time it got to the level where we are in the 80s and 90s, whatever, this is when these guys were leaving when I was first in the job, I actually just didn't really see it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm pretty sure that somewhere, in fact, I did on a case when there were guys who were corrupt. They were actually and they got done for it again. They were actually in Stoke Newington and were working with the drug dealers to sell drugs. They weren't selling them, but they were making sure that one team could sell and the others couldn't. So that I remember that clearly because I was doing some stuff there and I saw that. Right, so that's that. But to be fair, that is very, very few and far between. But the pen is so powerful.
Yeah, well, okay. So look, let's circle back a little bit to our last chat of the year when we spoke about Harry and Meghan, right?
Yeah.
Now, and obviously, Harry's book's come out.
Yeah.
Now, look, I'm going to give you a couple of weeks catch up. I'm on chapter 40 now, but I'm going to give you a couple of weeks to catch up before we talk about it. But remember, we spoke about I said to you, what did he actually do in the war?
Yeah.
Right. There's about 4 chapters where he talks in incredibly granular detail about exactly what he did in the war, including one time when he messed up the coordinates of a bomb and ended up bombing his own camp because he messed up the coordinates.
Right. Okay. So he's not putting himself in a fantastic light all the time, is he? Which is what I said.
It's so honestly, I'm going to highly recommend it. I mean, as you know, I'm a big fan anyway. I'm going to highly recommend it. The level of honesty that's in there, I would speculate that you can't make up. You know, I mean, he's got, like, we chatted, we speculated, and you know, I bowed down to your insights on what he might have done in the war, but he went right down to the level of, like,
I told you it was real, didn't I?
I
told you it was real.
Yeah, exactly. Like he not only, like, detailed every you know, like every brief that he'd had, but he also revealed his call signs. You know, it was right down to what he had for lunch. I mean, there was one story about when he's in Afghanistan and they delivered a live goat and he had to slaughter it to make goat curry. And that is a whole new level of real. I mean, very much. And also, I mean, he's narrating it himself. He narrates the book himself.
Right.
So there's a very well, I mean, you know, we know from doing these podcasts, like, you know, there's a lot of inference from the way that you speak.
Absolutely.
And the rate. But anyway, look, I'm going to give you a couple of weeks to read it because.
And then we want to go into it, yeah? You're going to then ask me.
Well, then I think we should revisit it because I think there's a lot of quite interesting stuff in there, and there's a lot of things that you and I had already speculated that he sort of actually validates, but sort of takes to a new level. So look, let's park this. Anyway, it's quite interesting that you're.
What have you got for me this week? What have you got for me? I can't wait.
It's quite interesting that your friend was talking about the strikes.
Yeah.
Because actually, that sort of prefaces where I'm going with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Last week or the last podcast, you were talking about weapons on a global scale.
Yes.
On a really hyper small scale, I guess, but on a really personal scale, I suppose. Every New Year, I mean, Happy New Year, by the way, to your listeners.
Yeah,
Happy New Year. Hope you all had a good Christmas. I hope you had a good Christmas. Really hope your children didn't get up at 3:30 like mine did. Like, I'm not a mega religious person at all, but there's that carol, isn't there? Little Town of Bethlehem, and it goes something like
great carol, actually.
Hopes and fears of all the years. Our hopes and fears of all the years, right? And I do always think of that every New Year, and I always think about, like, you know, what are my hopes and fears? What are my hopes and fears? And yeah, I mean, your friend is right to reference the strikes going on at the moment. The economy is not in a good place, you know, blah blah blah. We've spoken before in the past about fanatics and about have a go heroes, and actually, I think that to me, that's quite a real fear.
Right. So you mean your fear is being attacked?
Do you know what I mean? To preface this, I'm not, you know, this isn't something that I'm having mega anxiety about or whatever. But you know, it's one of those things where you think, right, when you look at, I mean, we're what, a decade on from the Tottenham riots, from the London riot. Like, I mean, what, we're 20 years on from the Brixton riots, right? When you think about the strikes and the unrest and the climate protesters and all the rest of it at the moment that's going on, it's actually only one step to, like, when does a strike become a riot? When does a protest become a riot?
I see what you're saying. To anarchy, you mean?
And
I'm with you.
Exactly, that level of anarchy. And where I'm going with this is what you said in your last episode about, a cruise missile's worth £1 million, right? If you could buy a knife on Amazon for 20 quid, whatever.
Yeah.
How much? I don't know. How much? Okay. I am aware, by the way, that we do need to safeguard this conversation. We do need to make sure that people aren't actually getting ideas from our conversation.
Absolutely.
So I will, I will put that wording in here. But I'm not being flippant here. But if on a global scale, a cruise missile that's going to sit in the that's going to sit unused for a decade, it's worth £1 million. Like, people are, or there's so much unrest that there are enough street weapons to actually cause that level of, or cause a similar level of damage. I mean, one of the things I'd say, I'm just gonna preface this with a personal anecdote for your listeners. My 10-year-old son, got sent home from school last year because and the school called up and they said he's brought a knife into school.
Right.
And I was like, what? And suddenly as a parent, you have all these dark thoughts that go through your head, like, Absolutely. Oh my God, my son has brought a knife into school and whatever. No, what he'd actually done was he'd got, like those, when you go camping, you get like those sort of knife, fork and spoon sort of things that are like a camp. Right. So he'd actually gotten one of those out of the camping kit to take into school to eat his lunch with. So it wasn't actually a knife intended to stab someone, but you suddenly just, I mean, like that's my biggest fear. I think my biggest fear is my son buying anyone I know buying a weapon on Amazon and then using it, right? There was a bit, to circle back to the media, there was a TV documentary where they investigated how easy it was to buy knives on the internet. And obviously it is quite easy to buy knives on the internet, like in every way, shape or form. But again, to circle back to a personal level, I've got 4 boys. It's a joke in our family about how anything can be weaponized. Like we kind of joke about, oh God, like, don't like, where are all the tent pegs? Oh God, like, they've used them as weapons or whatever. I mean,
if man is inhumane to man, as it used to be, and that includes woman as well, it's because she has a propensity, and I guess it's more he's, it's factually more he's, and I'm a criminologist, so let's keep to the facts. It's factually more he's that actually do utilize anything, repeat, anything as a weapon. Now, you're talking about getting a knife off eBay. Forget getting knives off eBay. That's somebody who wants to be fancy. It is, and I think I'm right, and I haven't looked up the figures because you've just thrown this on me, but I think you'll find I will be right, but please check as normal, and anybody else who wants to write in and say whether I'm right or wrong can do, but I think it's at something like 85% of knife wounds, murders, etc. are done with normal kitchen knives. It's not buying some fancy knife off eBay. You see, the problem is this, you see, and this is, I'm coming back to your profession again. You notice I just slide it back in there. I'm back to your profession. You seem to always look for the sexier bits. When in fact, the average knife used to maim people is just a normal kitchen knife of any type, which people can get hold of day in, day out.
Well, yeah, exactly. Or corrosive substances. I mean, again, like,
if you want to throw something in the people's faces,
let's not give people ideas, but the media would sort of portray somebody who could build a bomb as a criminal mastermind. But actually, again, my 8-year-old got a science kit for Christmas where, I mean, essentially you could have built something explosive.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're absolutely right. You know,
Do you know
why
what I mean?
is it though? Why it always has to be juicier?
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You need to give the story that makes the words. Where I'm going with this is, like your mate correctly identified, right? At the moment in the UK, you know, the weather's awful. A year ago, it was that sort of eating versus heating debate. Now, I think, you know, it's just genuinely it's a recession, right? I mean, I think it's genuinely accepted. And if you look back into history, right, in terms of uprisings and strikes and when they lead to violence, you know, there's a tipping point, isn't there? You know, and sort of poverty leads to poverty and lack of support from the government leads to unrest, and then that leads to, you know, and then that.
I don't want to let everybody off the hook. It can do, yeah. Don't want to let anybody off the hook.
Then that obviously, and then that often leads to something else. I remember, and it's funny because I would have been about 2, but I remember the Brixton riots. I remember because I was there, and I don't even know where I was there. Like we didn't live in London. Like
so that was you're talking about the 83 riots.
Yeah. And I've got a really, really vivid memory. Like we used to, my aunt, my dad used to run a theatre company in London, and we did. I wasn't born in London. I didn't grow up in London or whatever. But we used to come up to London every other weekend or something. And I just remember being with my aunt, and I must have been in a buggy or something because I don't remember walking or running or something or whatever. But I remember someone coming up to my aunt and saying, "Do you want a TV? I'll get you a TV." And then like smashing in the window of whatever the shop was.
Yeah, so it's traumatic, but you saw that.
But I just remember it. I just remember it, and I imagine that we'd probably just legged it like as quickly as possible. It's a really, really, really clear memory, and it's like, and like I say, I mean, I spent a lot of time as part of sort of peaceful protests. I mean, we spent a lot of time as a kid on Greenham Common and stuff, and so I don't think we actually meant to be. I genuinely don't think we meant to be part of the Brixton riots. I think we just sort of. I mean, I know it sounds.
You just have to be there.
I know it sounds stupid to be like, oh yeah, we're there by accident, but I think we just sort of happen to be in the periphery of.
Well, I think a lot of people are there by accident. See, now I was in the Broadwater Farm riots.
Right.
As an officer. At the time, because it was in my 2-year probation period, I was attached to the riot section, and we were called up there. And my recollection of that, you know, where a police officer was stabbed, had his head chopped off nearly.
Yeah.
My recollection of that was that this was really, really out of control. And more importantly, what I recollect more than anything was that many people like you were not involved, but just happened to be there. So this happening to be there is something that's real. It's not abnormal. People live there, so you just happen to be there. And whether you actually take physically part of it, or whether you are just caught up in it, that's a good way of putting it, caught up in it, is the problem. Now, a lot of organisations, and this is what people don't understand, a lot of organisations go out of their way to cause those riots. Organisations that want to undermine and overthrow the government, example. In that day, it was left-wing, but now I think you're going to find it more right-wing as well. What you get is, and in fact, indeed, the right-wing were also involved in it, because anything that caused strife and made people think, oh, these people are bad, was positive for the right-wing. So you had a lot of actions whereby people were political individuals purposely trying to instigate riots, because riots make people choose. It's the same way as Islamicists went down the road, Bin Laden went down the road, of performing 9/11 to make people of the Islamic faith choose, because he knew there'd be a backlash. And when the backlash comes, then what happens is people huddle towards whom they think might protect them. And that's what they look for. So it's not abnormal that you would just happen to be there. But your thing with poverty, I think it's much, much deeper than what we actually, and this is only my personal opinion, okay, as always. I think it's much more deeper than what we actually think. If you go back to your grandparents, and forget exploitation in other parts of the world, etc., colonialism, blah, 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 blah. Forget all of that. But if you go back to your grandparents, let's talk about it in the West, because it's a bit different if you're captive in Belgium, Congo or somewhere, and you're the indigenous people and they're making you work. But if you go back to your grandparents, they basically could have 8 children and probably feed them by only the father working. Now, they wouldn't be living fantastically. They wouldn't be living great. And by the time they got to 13, they'd be a man or a woman and they'd have to go out and work and help them. But the reality is they could probably just about feed them, right? What you get as you move along that road towards the 60s, never had it so good, everything's great. But you still then had people thinking, well, to get what I need, I now need to work maybe 1 or 2 jobs because I'm trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? So now the guy's working 2 jobs. And then he thinks, well, I better have my missus working as well. So the wife's out working by the 70s. And then by the 80s, the wife's definitely working. The husband's working. They're trying to get 2 jobs. And this is the big one. Because they can't sustain what they've got, they're starting to borrow. And by the 90s, they're absolutely borrowing because their car's borrowed. This is borrowed. Obviously, the house is on mortgage, etc. The TV's now also on some kind of higher purchase or some borrowing process. And by the time you get to 2000s, actually, their salaries don't pay for what they're doing, so they're in debt. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because
so we've now got indebtedness.
Because like how many people, like how many people, if you ask yourself the honest question, like how many people just actually consider what they've got on a credit card to be part of their salary?
Exactly that. So the danger then is once you start getting some type of recession like 2008, the system cannot, because the system's a giant Ponzi scheme. You know, what we do now is we print money. I begin to sound like a right winger here. I know people say this guy's gone right wing. No, but we begin to print money. But you know, in the past, let's go back to the past again, money had a value. And if you look at that pound note, and I think it says on it, and I may be wrong, but check again. And if somebody can tell me I'm wrong, please do call in. But it says on it that this pound note from the Bank of England can be exchanged. And it's really saying it can be exchanged for its worth. And that worth is actually in gold or in silver or whatever. Now you can't do that because we don't, you know, nations don't have the gold sitting on hand to pay for all of the currency they've created. What in the business they call fiat currency, right? They're just creating currency, trillions of it, without anything to back it up. The problem with that is that the wealthiest people, the 1% or even less than that, they then don't believe in it. So they start buying up other things, houses, art, gold, etc., to make sure they're looked after. And then you get the ludicrous situation whereby a guy owning a company is, you know, earns what, 400 times what his lowest worker. In some cases in the United States, the most unequal part, they're earning like 1,000 times more than one of their workers is. I mean, how do you sustain that? Because the problem is, and this is where we come back to what you are talking about, what people seek today is not what's just going to fulfill them. They seek what the other guys got. So they're measuring themselves against an inordinately wealthy individual that they can never aspire to.
Yeah, so what was that guy called? Adam Smith. The wealth.
Right? Wealth of Nations.
Yeah, exactly. So he said like what did he say? Like if there was a free market, then the invisible hand would create a wealth equilibrium or something.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And you know where I saw that starkest? I saw that in 2008. In 2008, we talk about capitalism. By that, with time we'd won. Look, I'm culpable in this. I helped capitalism win the game because of I was nearly going to say a misguided belief in nationhood. I shouldn't say that. It's not a misguided belief. You know, I am a national of the United Kingdom. I did my best for my country. But the reality was that my feel was that we were helping everybody in the system, right? So, you know, I want to defeat communism because I don't think it was in bringing it. Look, if it worked, I'd be happy with it. But to bring it into the Western system, say, example, and into other systems, somebody's got to pay the price for that. And it's oftentimes always the poor guy who ends up dying for somebody else's ideals. So, but I'm not down on communism. If, it may function, great, fantastic. But the point I'm making is I, helped defeat communism. And we get to capitalism and we get to the 2008 situation where the banks have basically done everybody's legs and ripped everybody off, basically on a massive Ponzi scheme where they know they're selling houses to folk who will never be able to pay it back. And all they're thinking of is, would the next fella pays for the next fella pays for the next fella pays for the next fella? A massive Ponzi scheme, right, which is going on. And then all of a sudden, that Ponzi scheme falls, right? So the banks now, what happens? You'd think if it was proper capital, they'd say, sorry, banks, you overdid it. You did your legs. Now you've got to live with the consequence. No! What happens is we bail them out to the tune of trillions of dollars or pounds, right? We bail these guys out. They'll never lose a week's worth of pay. They keep getting unbelievable bonuses. When the normal guy who's lost his house or lost his car or lost his or her had sense of living and living on the street, they're the ones who are paying the price for what the bank has done. But the bank's bailed out. Do you see what I mean? So that's no longer capital. That's now some kind of, I don't know what it is. Is it some kind of feudalism or something? You tell me what it is. But it's not actual capitalism, is it, anymore? Now, I agree with playing around with capitalism to help the majority, but I don't agree with playing around with capitalism to help the minority. That's where the problem lies. So this is where we've got to now. And so your point that you make, angry people, they look around and they think, how can I achieve what this guy's got? And unfortunately, some of them do the mathematics and say, I don't care how I get the money. I'm just going to go out and get it.
Well, yeah. To me, like, when you look at the 2011 riots, the Mark Duggan riots or whatever, like they started out as a protest. They started out as a peaceful protest, and then all of a sudden, like, suddenly it was like, oh, let's just bomb a few police cars and all the rest of it. But circling back to where I started out this conversation, it was like, if you looked at the way the media reported it, it was like, okay, so suddenly this went from a peaceful protest to there were weapons and missiles and bombs and the cars were set alight and all the rest of it. And it's like, well, nobody's got that sat in their house. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like that. I dug out a piece from the Guardian from the time, and it said something like, the sky was alight with fireworks from protesters or whatever, and it's like, well, okay, I might have a few sparklers in the kitchen drawer. I don't know where. Do you know what I mean? This is sensationalism, I think, but is it? Is this a case of do you remember that film? What's that film called when the guy totally loses his shit and he's like, oh god, what's it called? Like Falling Down.
Yeah, Falling Down.
Like,
I remember it.
Completely loses his shit because like whatever, and he's just
can't get a pizza. He can't get a burger the way he wants it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But like, it's the last straw, isn't it? It's the last straw, basically what he's saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But let's say that Britain, you can't get public transport, you can't get an ambulance, you can't get anything in the post, you can't get whatever because of all of the strikes, like, and then breaking point means like whatever. Historically it's happened, and
I'm ahead of you.
You see where I'm going?
That's absolutely right. And historically, this is what the special branch was about. The special branch was looking for these indicators, because what you don't seem to understand in many of these cases, it isn't spontaneous solely. There are people agitating from organisations, right wing, left wing, that agitating. The guy who blew people up in Brixton, the right winger, and I've forgotten his name because I was meant to actually speak to him in prison. And at one stage he was going to speak to me, and then he said he wouldn't do anymore because I wanted to get his understanding. This is when I was running the NPOIU, National Public Order Intelligence Unit, the Strategic Analysis Unit, because my task there was to find out why people do things. Right. So I wanted to speak to this guy, and he'd been part of 2 or 3 different right-wing organisations. BMP,
The nail bombing guy.
nail bombing guy.
Yeah.
I've forgotten his name. I'll remember it soon, but I'm terrible on names, and I think I've got a bit of a problem. Anyway, the nail bombing guy. I'll remember his name soon. But he had been part of 2 or 3 organisations fleetingly, but they weren't bad enough for him. He actually wanted to take some action. Now, the reality is there are people out there like that who are looking to stoke up problems all the time. You only need to look at Brazil with Bolsonaro, what he's done, and you only need to look at the United States, what they've done. The United States will rip itself apart because the right wing is so vociferous. And so this is what's going to happen. And the left wing to the right wing is perceived as vociferous. And that's where your problem lies. So you've got these militias, and unfortunately, a lot of these so-called patriots in the US are very, very, very well-trained ex-military. Many, indeed, ex-special forces. So they know what they're doing. This is the danger of these guys. They know what they're doing, these guys and gals. Let's not put women out of this game. So what you're looking at is people's last hurrahs. And how is that then sold? Oftentimes it's sold with a racial background. It's sold that before these people came here, we were doing all right. Or when we had them under control, we were doing all right. Now we've let them go and see what's happening. We need to get back in charge again. So that's how it's often sold on the right. On the left, it's sold in the manner of the ruling elite is ripping you off, but the only way to stop them from ripping you off is actually to come up against them and to trample them and cut them down, etc., etc., etc. Now, so I'm not for either of the extremes. I'm for trying to change that, and it might be naive in a more peaceful manner because it has been relatively achieved previously. There was a time when they had to give us something, give the normal working people something, because I guess there were 2 systems. There was a communist system and there was a capitalist system. So because there's 2 systems, you couldn't go out and out on one way or the other. So therefore, people had to be given something, the general masses in the middle. I guess once one's been totally defeated, or nigh on totally defeated, then you don't need to actually appease. Because what people always forget, the golden age of America, people forget that the American wealthy person in the golden age of America in the 1960s was paying like 80% tax. And in Britain, it's like 90% tax. Remember, the Rolling Stones left to go and live in America, but they're only paying about 10% tax less because these people actually did pay to it. Now, your average billionaire in the United States chooses to pay tax if he so wishes or she so wishes, because they end up paying less than the average man or woman. So this is the problem you've now got. People see it's not fair. So the question is, how can it be sustained if it's perceived as not fair? I think Western Europe has had a very good run at it, particularly in the EU. When it started off in the beginning, it was a rich man's circus, but it was quickly actually taken and worked through that, there's a lot of good things came for the everyday person. Now, they need to try and hold on to that against provocation from the right. And in countries like ours that's moved out of that system, we've got to hold against that change. You can see the Labour Party now doesn't attack anything, does it? It doesn't attack the negatives because it's frightened of being left behind. So it plays the racial game just the same way as the Conservatives do. It doesn't do any less. Starmer won't say boo to a goose if it looks as though he'll upset somebody in the red wall. And the newspapers are very happy to play the role of passing that information over. So my point is...
By the way, I'll just interject. Don't ever say boo to a goose as a fucking aggressive. I've been attacked by a goose. They're buggers. By the way, if your listeners ever get attacked by a goose, top tip is you have to get them by the neck, right? But you have to get them by the neck, right? Because it doesn't hurt them, it just calms them down. But basically, a goose will kill you.
Well, there you go. And why shouldn't he? Why shouldn't he or she kill you? We've been killing them for years. Maybe they're just thinking, hey, hang on, this human being's been killing me for years. I'm going to get my own back. But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Excellent, excellent.
Get an army of geese. Yeah, that would be future.
But
No,
no,
I
Fergus,
hear what you're saying.
tell me
No,
where
it's
to
not-
go.
I totally hear what
I
you're
can't
saying.
help come down on this subject. Tell me where to go. Tell me to tighten up because I'm very wide. Tighten me up. Come on, give me something
No,
tight.
I hear what you're saying, but like, look, let's circle back to that nail bomber guy, right?
Yep.
Did he not? He had like a JD Sports holdall or something,
Correct.
right? And he had like he had a homemade bomb.
Yeah.
And he set it off in Brixton Market, didn't he?
On three different occasions. He set it off in three different places. He set it off in a gay bar. He set it off in an area in Brixton to kill black people, and he set it off in the East End to kill people of Asian heritage. So
Right,
that's what he was doing. He was
what I'm
looking
saying
at
is,
targeting the different sectors that he, as a right winger, did not like.
But let's say, I mean, I know I'm being a bit blasé to say, oh, that was before the internet, but it kind of was.
Yes.
Right? So how would you know how to make a nail bomb?
Right, because there was a thing called, in the old days, and everybody knew it who was in that game, and obviously in the branch you understood it, there's a thing called the Anarchist Cookbook. And the Anarchist Cookbook told you how to build a whole host of things, from Molotov cocktails to various types of bombs. How to hold it.
Sorry, let's just clarify for your listeners. Molotov cocktails when you throw petrol through the
petrol in a bottle. You know, the more simplified versions thereof are petrol in a bottle, a wick in it, and you set it on fire, and then you throw it in it. And when the bottle hits the ground, it breaks up and explodes into a gust of fire. Right. And when we were doing our training, I told you the riot aspect of it, we used to train with Molotov cocktails being thrown at us. And they still do that. So you can see what it's like. The mass amount of heat that comes off it is incredible. And all you're behind is a shield, and you've got a burn proof, supposedly. Nothing's burn proof, is it? It's like nothing's bulletproof. But, you know, it will be burn resistant for a while. And you got to learn how to hopefully put your shield there, which prevents it from coming over. But when it comes over, you know, other officers learn how to wheel you over and roll you over and stuff like that to stop it from burning on you. So, but it's not don't always work, of course. So sometimes you get injured. But the point is that the reality of the situation is that the Molotov cocktail is a very effective tool, very effective. And only long shields, you've got short shield, which is a round short shield, and you've got the long shield. The long shield gives you the best protection, but of course you're not always using the long shield if you're moving quickly. So a short shield.
Again, I'm going to stop here because again, I ask the questions that everybody wants to know.
Sure.
Right? The way most people would probably, if they've heard of a Molotov cocktail, way most people would perceive it would be like some petrol in a milk bottle with a bit.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, right? Good way. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Would it be bigger and better, or is it not possible if you were to put it in a larger container?
It works wherever. Right. I'll give you a good example. Yes, you've asked me the question.
For example, it always occurred to me, like, if you were going to go out and get that petrol, why not just leave it in the petrol can and lob it in the petrol can?
If you can put it in the bottle of glass, so when it breaks, the glass breaks, it all combusts at the same time. Because what you're using an element of combustion of the gases of the petrol exploding and firing up, as well as the petrol going. So you, in a glass is very good. And the reason why I'm answering you this, remember the nigh on 6 months of riots in China, in Hong Kong to be precise, special region of China, right? Mm-hmm. They were firing barrels of petrol at police, right? Basically full of oil, full of petrol, and they had like a medieval slingshot. Yeah, literally, imagine a medieval slingshot. They were slingshotting that over to police. Now, we were calling the Chinese down for defending against that. Nobody got killed when and this is nigh on every night going on. Nobody got killed. And I'll tell you, if that was in the United States, as soon as that Molotov went over that size, they'd be shooting into the crowd, because that's the way the American would see it. And indeed, back in the 1970s, if you can remember the riots in Hong Kong when we controlled it, and the British Army was there, people got killed then. But not a single person got killed on that other.
Well, I guess even if you go back to the medieval thing, like that trebuchet thing that the French had, like that.
Yep,
that
that's what it was like.
It's kind of the same thing, but it just wasn't very.
That is
accurate,
exactly what it was
it?
like. They were just but when you've got lines of police, you just fire them into the back of police. And the reason why they were doing that as well is it goes over the front line. So when you put your shield in front, it's gone over the shield. So now you're inside. See, these are dangerous tactics. These are the tactics that they were using, right? And they were, there's a whole host of things they're doing. You only need to look back. It's not me saying it's not propaganda. You only need to look back at the film taken by Western media to see that what was going on. And my argument was they were extremely reserved in their actions against the people who were, day in, night out for at least 3 months, if not more, attacking them. So this is what you've got to look to. What do the police do? Because all the police are really, at the end of the day, and police can't strike. You know that. For the pure and simple reason that if police strike, it's open day for everybody who wants to get on the street. So it is illegal for police to strike. Illegal. They're now talking about not having nurses and firemen and other people not being able to strike. But the police haven't been able to strike since about 1920. So it's illegal. End of story. That's it. So they are there because the state needs to protect itself. And it uses the police to do that. So you can imagine what it would be like if overnight people said there is no police. Because all those people who haven't got would probably turn around and say, well, it's night time to get whilst there's nothing on there. I mean, what? In some ways, you could argue, why wouldn't people? I mean, I wouldn't, because I'm sort of so orientated. So the question of where we are with this has to go back further. It has to go back to a belief in society that's equal in many ways. Yeah. It has to go back to good parenting. It has to go back to the state helping you.
To that, but I mean, I guess, do you know what? Yeah, well, yeah. But I mean, like, yeah. I mean, like, look, I didn't protest for climate change. I don't live in London anymore. Like, I agree with climate change. I didn't protest for climate change. When I was a kid, I protested for a lot of things, but when does speaking up sort of become a crime? I mean, like
I think you have to be able to speak up.
Think about the poll tax riots. Yeah. Right. I mean,
again, planned. You see, this is the thing, right? This is the thing. You're absolutely right. You have to speak up. So when 800,000 to 1 million people came on the street to prevent war in Iraq, two things we've got to always realise. Okay, and this is my game. I was in the branch. This was my part of my game. Two things you got to realise: if you put 800,000 people on the street to 1 million people on the street, you know what that means? That means something like half of the population, if not more, believe in what you're doing. Because the vast majority of people are just apathetic. Yeah. Particularly in the United Kingdom, we don't have that, like in France, that verve, or in some cases in Germany, that verve to get onto the street. So as a general rule, if you can put 1 million people, 800,000, 1 million people on the street, I tell you what, you've got a hell of a lot of support, massive amounts of support, right? When a politician then doesn't listen to that, that's not good, because that is now suggesting that democracy isn't working right. That's suggesting that we're not listening to the people.
Exactly. So even to kind of circle back to what you were talking about last week, like, what's more dangerous, geopolitics at a war level, or bad decisions at territory specific level that
the territorial level? Yeah. Look, as von Clausewitz said, warfare is politics by another means, right? And so the problem is that the people running a state sometimes have other agendas than the people within the state. And the reality is, this is what we always need to understand about our system. I think I said it, so I don't want to go over it. is we basically have a vote every 4, 5, 6 years. Right? And then that's it. That is the amount of participation that the everyday man or woman has in our system. That's it. That's the end of it. You're not asked about anything else, really. Now, you can become a local councillor, you can become an MP, you can be whatever. You can make those strides to become all of those things. But the problem is, and this is what we really need to see, the system has now learned how to defend itself about people coming in. So if you now want to get any real type of power, you're really going to have to be part of the 2 primary powers. Or let's say 3. Even let's open it up, let's say 4. 4 primary powers who are political bodies. So you're part of those powers. All of them are co-opted to the centre. To what I mean the centre, to the controlling elements of that party. Now, they can have internecine warfare like the Tories presently. But the bottom line is that there's a direction that they're all going in. And so if you sit outside that direction, you aren't going to get any power. So although I advocate the system, I'm kind of talking against it in some ways. And I don't want to, because in my experience, the little person, the little woman, the little man pays the price of insurrection. That's my experience. Now, if it's that bad that you have to step up because it's all ripped apart and they're doing you so badly, then maybe it's worth putting your life on the line for it and losing your life. But generally, that's not the case in the United Kingdom. That's not the case in most Western European countries. That's not the case in many countries, to be fair. I don't care whether that's in China or in the United States. Generally, there's other ways around to the system. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the end of part 1 of this week's discussion that Fergus started off. So we had a new start for the year. And what we'll do is we'll come back next week with part 2 of this discussion, which we're basically talking about the state of the UK today and what it may or may not lead to. So, see you again next week.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.